Recording has just started.
So thank you. Thanks for everybody for making it tonight. It's 7:02 and I'll call the meeting to order. I'll call roll. Please indicate your presence by saying here or making note in some way. Ryan Olson, here. Chris Kovac has an excused absence. Marlene Waxy has an excused absence. David Liu.
Present.
Thank you. Brenda Spears, excused absence. Andrew Eloquent.
Present.
Thank you. Tim Motley.
Here.
Thank you. Nicholas Lee. Katie Bell. Paul Adair has an excused absence. Martha Ginther.
Here.
Mary Stevens. Thank you. The next item up on the agenda is the approval of the May 30th minutes. The minutes were included in the agenda packet. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Oh, I got a hand. Oh, or is that just?
No, that's for the next thing.
Thank you. Next order of business is the public comment. I see we have one public on. Connie, floor is yours. Please keep it to 5 minutes if possible.
Okay, hi, this is Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk. I was just listening to City Council approve an extra $700,000+ for the Hillside Park and commensurate wetland mitigation. It was portrayed as being everybody on board and everybody was happy about the result, which is not exactly true. So that made me a little cranky. I would prefer a more realistic presentation of Hillside Park, but that ship has sailed. So let's move on to the urban forest management plan. I sent you an email and I am speaking to reiterate some of those points, which are, I did not see a very good connection that was actionable and trackable about the community's passion for wildlife and habitat. It seems like it's still a tree plan instead of a forest management plan. And the way we live mainly in Issaquah are the critters, and the habitat is in our streets. It's in our backyard, our front yard, our side yard. And so we live amongst it. It is not simply the riparian corridors that need the attention. It is the whole town and its situation right next to the urban growth boundary. So I would like to see a much stronger connection to the community value of the habitat and wildlife that is missing. So if you would please pick up that ball and run with it, I would be ever so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone present for public comments. Anyone else online? So with that, we'll move on to regular business. The first item under regular business is the urban forest management plan update.
Yeah, thanks. So we've got Dan Hens, our urban forest supervisor here, and our consultants from Planet Geo do a presentation, and we'll have a little discussion, but just a note that tonight might be a little bit of a shorter meeting potentially with the one item. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't have as much discussion as needed as a board. But with that, I will hand it over to Dan.
Thanks, Asante. Once again, Dan Hens, urban forest supervisor at the city of Issaquah. Been in this role for a little over a year now, which is a brand new role with the city within our Parks and Community Services department. So as we're really looking to build our urban forestry program, some of those kind of core tenets, obviously having staff, having a forest management plan, which we're developing and discussing tonight. And this has been kind of going on for, we started probably in earnest back in September with Planet Geo. We've met with y'all, I think, once or twice already, kind of early was, around some of the kind of city staff contributions to kind of the initial plan, how other plans and policies in the city connect to urban forestry. And then we all came back, I believe, in February, talking about the kind of public outreach process. So really kind of started internal in the city, reviewing kind of staff organizational setup as it relates to working with trees, you know, like I said, research around plans, and then really kind of push it out to the public in February and March. Have a lot of results that then started to tie into what Chris is going to mainly focus on today, what we kind of refer to as the long-term framework. So, you know, looking at the vision, kind of 5 guiding principles, and then starting to look at some of the goals and strategies under those principles. So that's mainly what was in the presentation. Chris is going to recap the 2 here in just a little bit. I'm guessing we'll be coming to you all at least 1 or 2 more times before the end of the year, having a draft towards the end of the summer, and then hopefully adopting the plan in the fall, or kind of late summer is what we're looking for right here. So this certainly won't be the last touch point, but this is, you know, kind of the step before moving into an actual draft of the plan. So really kind of great to get feedback on whether it's the high level visions or if there's certain goals and strategies you feel like are missing or maybe not emphasized as much. This is the really great time for us to hear that and try to make some of those adjustments before we move into drafting the plan. Chris, hopefully that's a good intro. You all have met Chris Pfeiffer before with Planet Geo. We'll hand it over to Chris here for a presentation. Chris, I don't know if you have a preference, like, you know, probably saving questions at the end until there's something, unless there's something that's really, you know, needs to be clarified on a given slide, but we'll have time for discussion with myself and Chris afterwards. And yeah, happy to hear how you all are kind of seeing and, you know, what you're thinking about this stage of the forest management plan. So Chris, take us away.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and hello, everyone. As Dan mentioned, my name is Chris Pfeiffer with Planet Geo, and yeah, I think it makes sense to hold questions till the end unless something's pressing or there's an issue with how we're presenting or covering a topic here this evening. So we'll get right into the presentation, but I do want to mention Dan did a great job of giving an overview of what has been completed to date, how we met with you in late February along with the environmental board to prepare us for engagement with the public. And from my experience, I feel like it was a successful engagement process, and we're going to continue that momentum with the next steps in this project. But I think just to refresh your memory, that's where we were at with things, getting your insights, and now we're reporting back and talking about how the culmination of planning efforts has led to this draft framework that we'll really focus on for the presentation. But just to cover our bases here, I'm with Planet Geo as the Director of Consulting. I'm the project manager for this project. And I want to recognize Alex and Matt, who are certified arborists and experienced in policy, planning, and management of trees in the Pacific Northwest. So could not be here without them putting in the work in data crunching, analyses, research, and really the key findings that we'll be sharing with you this evening. And so this presentation is relatively brief. We'll start out with a brief update on where we're at with the project and the timeline for all of these pieces to come together, and then focus on the draft long-term framework of the plan, which, as Dan mentioned, that's the vision, the guiding principles, and the goals at this stage. There are additional details and context and supporting studies that feed into the goals as priority actions, but we are focused on those core elements of the framework. So then we'll summarize the next steps and then open it up for discussion, which I think will entail discussing our findings as well as the draft vision statement and the supporting principles and goals. So stay tuned for those and you know, keep in mind your comments and questions around those. And so as we outlined in our presentation this evening, the first segment discusses a brief overview of the planning tasks and the timeline. And so like Dan said, beginning late last year, the baseline assessment was completed with the canopy assessment. We also did data analyses and a review of existing plans and policies. And so that assessment provided the context so that we could effectively engage with the city staff and the community beginning in 2024. And we'll share some of those public engagement findings. In the second quarter of this year, an evaluation of findings was applied to our benchmarking processes and urban forest audits, which give us results to incorporate into the draft long-term framework. And then going into July, we'll be incorporating that feedback to the draft goals and strategies so that we can prepare the draft plan, continue public engagement sessions, and then present on the draft plans and the final plans with boards, committees, and on through to council. So as part of our engagement with the community and partners, the planning team met with the tribal forester of the Snoqualmie tribe to weigh in on the planning process, the long-term framework that we're presenting on this evening, and other considerations. And so when we categorize the discussion, the first topic comes collaboration coordination. And with this, we found that the tribe is supporting the city in evaluating the terms and requirements in the Heritage Tree Ordinance, and also sharing information about the tribe's programs and efforts relating to what they define as culturally significant natural environment features. And during our discussions, it was recognized that there is a shared challenge observed in terms of resources for enforcing and monitoring tree-related ordinances, especially when you look at the survival of trees planted as part of mitigation for development projects. It was also identified that generally the public is unaware that the tribe is serving and can serve as a pivotal partner for the city. We also looked at strengths around trees in the community and the natural environment. And what we identified as shared strengths included the tribe's desire to protect and plant large canopied native trees that survive to maturity. And the tribe also expressed support of Issaquah conducting ongoing tree canopy assessments to keep a pulse on that natural feature and that natural resource. The tribe also expressed support of the tree code, which includes canopy cover requirements, which is a bit unique for the county and really the region, with the requirements relating to canopy retention and planting. So then when we look directly at the plan, the Urban Forest Management Plan, or UFMP, it was discussed that there is support for the development and implementation of the plan, and also that the tribe could provide language relating to the natural environment, history of land management in the region, and also provide additional reviews of the draft goals and strategies. So we met earlier this month to review the initial framework and had insights and feedback, and we're going to continue that engagement. And it's really been a great working relationship with the tribe, with Dan as the urban forest supervisor and us as the consultants. One other thing I wanted to mention is that the tribe did express interest in having more of a presence within and among the goals and strategies that we draft for the management plan. And that's a really strong sign of this ongoing partnership that the tribe's interested in with the city. So there are all these pieces coming together to form this long-term roadmap. And what I want to share with you now is the high-level findings from the public survey efforts that were underway. And so when we look at the key findings, this infographic is summarized for presentation with this meeting. And the survey was posted online from March to April. And after a series of social media and messaging campaigns and raising awareness at the Sustainability Fair in late March, a total of 235 responses were received. And of those, just some key statistics, the majority who reported are from the Squaw Mountain neighborhood and Issaquah Highlands. And getting some more demographics, most were between the 35 to 55-year-old range, which in my experience is a younger crowd taking part in the survey. Generally, we see the above 55-year-olds, and whereas that was second in majority, first it was the 35 to 55-year-olds. We then also just a general question about the interest in supporting a citywide canopy cover goal by planting trees on their own private property. And the majority, or 26%, said they are very interested in more trees. And the University of Washington Evans Group did additional analyses and asked additional questions around private tree care and planting incentives that we can discuss more during the open Q&A. So from the survey continuing on, most expressed concerns about the amount of invasive plant species across the city, in open spaces and natural areas, the concerns of wildfires and harmful tree pests and diseases, the issues caused by trees such as sidewalk damage and limbs falling, and other processes and issues like tree permitting and regulations around trees. And with these concerns in mind, the public would like to see the management plan actions or initiatives support the development of green infrastructure and spaces, with 74% selecting that option. 68% would like to see increased tree plantings in underserved areas, and 66% would like to see initiatives that support or incentivize tree care and planting on private property. When looking at initiatives for public engagement, 36% selected volunteer events, 29% for workforce development, and 27% for citizen science and local research. And lastly, when asking about questions that would gather input on the vision for the future of Issaquah's urban forest, we found that 86% would like to see the urban forest serve as a refuge for wildlife and biodiversity. 76% would like to see the urban forest bolstered to contribute more to environmental health and air quality, and 71% would like the urban forest expanded to create a network of green spaces for all communities. So that vision of what the future would look like for the urban forest can help to inform the strategies that we begin to draft as part of the management plan. And so that's just one component. This is a data-driven plan. And to support that effort, a canopy assessment was completed in 2023. And this assessment provides data which we'll utilize to develop strategies that support what we're hearing from staff in the community, such as prioritizing areas to increase tree canopy cover. Last meeting, we touched on canopy cover for 6 select riparian areas in the city, and this slide now summarizes the overall citywide tree canopy metrics, as we call them. So from the study, 51% of the city is shaded by the canopy of trees when viewed from above. A total of 16% of the city's land area is classified as possible planting area, and 33% of the city is classified as areas that are unsuitable for adding more trees and getting more tree canopy cover. So this 2023 assessment provides an update to the 2019 assessment that used 2017 imagery. So keeping these dates in mind, just the graphic will illustrate how this canopy has changed over 4 time periods, which is really unique for communities that have this follow-up data to support development of strategies and monitoring canopy change. And this summary chart just shows that in 2011, 48%, and with the most recent assessment using 2021 imagery, 51.19% canopy cover citywide. So more than half of the city is shaded by the canopy of trees. From that time period, the 10-year time span, there's a net gain of 479 acres of canopy cover. And so that's really telling about the region, the efforts, but there are more things to learn about what type of canopy, how healthy is it, where is that canopy? And so that gets down into the strategy level of the management plan. And so lastly, for highlights, we discussed the findings from the U.S. Forest Service's Urban Forest Audit System and the indicators of sustainable urban forest management. And these evaluations are based on findings and the data that we uncovered during the planning process. You know, things like the canopy cover assessment, the public survey, and staff workflows and priorities, benchmarking, looking at industry standards and protocols. And so to conduct these evaluations, the Forest Service organized key urban forestry elements into 3 categories: the trees, the management, and the people. Within each of those 3 categories, there are elements that support the category. So for example, we have the category of trees with a series of elements that were evaluated and scored by the consultants with reviews by the city project team. The scoring from low, moderate to good consider, city context, the benchmarking results, the consultant's experience, and industry standards. And as an example, we look at the management category, and most elements scored low to moderate, but there is a good score for having the canopy assessment completed. When we look at the people category, no element scored good, but the majority were scored as moderate. And as a result, This gives us an overall score so that we can start to develop strategies in the plan that leverage the strengths to address some of the gaps or the challenges and shortcomings that we have observed with these audits. So I briefly mentioned on the previous slide that this long-term framework of the plan was informed by the planning process. And this process, as a recap, included the research and reviews, analyses of tree data like the canopy assessment, benchmarking to compare program data to other cities and industry standards, internal and external engagement exercises, and a culmination of these results that we applied to the urban forest audit. And going on to the next slide and wrapping up the long-term framework structure, these processes and inputs resulted in the draft framework, which consists of the vision, the principles, the goals, strategies, and supporting priority actions. And these actions are SMART. They're strategic, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And so this long-term framework, along with the urban forest audits, provide a structure for measuring and monitoring plan implementation progress, and they will serve as a foundation for adapting strategies over time as needed so that the plan serves as a living roadmap going forward as things change in the environment and to the resource. So that's kind of the story of how this all came to be with the draft long-term framework. And what I'll present now is the draft statement, the vision statement. And the roadmap for Issaquah's urban forests will guide the city toward a shared vision. So based on planning results and feedback from staff and the community, this draft vision statement is provided. And just as a note, the draft is intended for your review and feedback, and that this vision should encompass a shared commitment from the city, its partners, and the community. And so this will be a working draft as we go through the review processes. And this statement is based in part on the feedback that we gathered from the public and staff engagement exercises. So just as an example, as a recap from the public survey, the majority, or 86% of the public survey responses, envision the urban forest serving as a refuge for wildlife and biodiversity. When we look at the staff survey and how it could inform the vision, the majority, or 56%, would like to see the urban forest better address climate change issues. So as you can see in the draft language, it touches on these priorities and preferences that we gathered from the engagement processes. So now to direct the city towards this vision that we'll draft and finalize together, these guiding principles were prepared. And the principles were organized into themes that we feel demonstrate the city's priorities. They align with the urban forest audits I discussed, and they really serve as a guiding compass as urban forest resources and conditions change over time. You know, strategies may change, but these core guiding principles will keep us going towards the vision. So for example, the guiding principle for equitable and resilient canopy cover would serve as a commitment statement and provides the rationale behind the theme and the supporting goals that follow. And these statements were drafted for each theme, including maintenance and management, preservation, protection, funding and levels of service, and community education, engagement, and stewardship. And so wrapping up the framework here, each theme and the guiding principle is supported by a series of draft goals. And as shown here, the same theme, equitable and resilient canopy cover, has 3 supporting goals. And they address reaching a canopy cover target, a cooperative tree planting program, and a planting strategy for resiliency. But what's not shown on this slide are the supporting priority actions, which will also include, additional context, descriptions, and details that will support the city and its partners in implementing an action to reach a goal. So here's just a layout of the other examples, like theme B has 4 draft goals, and this was done for each of the 5 themes for this management plan. So that concludes the presentation. I began with an update on the project and the timeline. I highlighted key findings from our engagement with the Snoqualmie tribe, the public survey findings, and some high-level summaries of the 2023 canopy assessment. I then touched on the scoring of the urban forest audits and how all of that came together to develop the draft long-term framework. And this is where we're looking for reviews and input so that we make this a plan for, the community, the boards, and the staff. And so going forward from here, we'll be incorporating this feedback from staff and board into an updated framework, and we'll continue to work on the draft plan. And we're looking to have an internal draft for review here coming up in July. We also have several board and committee meetings coming up, and we'll provide updates on the status of the project as well as gather additional feedback. And we'll incorporate that into a second draft plan. And so lastly, the final plan is expected to be ready by the end of September of this year, with adequate reviews, revision processes to get it, the vision, principles, and goals lined up for the city. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan to see if he has any last remarks or anything to clarify, and then open up to any questions y'all have about the presentation. And I want to thank you all for your time and attention this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I don't think I have much to add. Hopefully that was very much kind of the roadmap of how we got to where we're at today. I think, to me, the most help, and maybe we could, Chris, pull up either the vision statement, start there, and then go to the 5 principles, maybe as a starting point for the discussion. Hopefully, maybe all of you have that in front of you, but we could get back to that slide if that works, Chris. But obviously, if there's, I know we kind of just quickly went through some of the goals for each of those 5 principles. If there's more kind of nuanced stuff you want to get into, that's great. But I do think, we want to kind of start with this high level vision statement principles, make sure we feel pretty good with those. And then, continue, as Chris mentioned, to kind of develop the kind of specifics and actionable items under each of those principles. So yeah, maybe I'll kind of pause there. And if you have questions unrelated to this too, from things past in the presentation, we can certainly go into that as well. We don't have to go right into this, but I think for the feedback we're looking for tonight, those would be the big areas.
Like, question just in terms of, I saw the plateau, we're kind of hit 52%. It appeared to back down a little bit, or 51, whatever, to lower. Have we identified what attributed to that plateau or the net loss at all?
Chris and I haven't had a whole lot of chance to discuss this. I don't think so. The original urban tree canopy assessment that we also did as Planet Geo back in 2019 with that 2017 data did look at the city across sub areas, and that really kind of helped, essentially kind of neighborhood areas, that really kind of helped inform some of the tree preservation code we have in terms of kind of target canopy based on different areas of the city. We're not going through that level of depth this time, but we have the citywide data, and then we kind of decided to do this focus on riparian areas with some of the connection to salmon and other benefit stormwater, as we see in those areas along our streams and lake shores. So that aligns a bit with some of the requirements that Public Works has for their annual stormwater permit from the state too, where there's more and more emphasis on riparian planning and restoration. So to your point, Ryan, unless Chris, you have something different here, I don't think we necessarily have nuances in the data that might explain that plateauing. I guess the last thing I'll say before handing over to Chris is keep in mind there's a lag time on this, so trees we plant today probably won't show up as urban tree canopy for 5 to maybe 10 years, depending on the species. I believe 14 feet is the height of vegetation. Thumbs up from Chris there. That counts. So when we're planting, little sapling seedlings, that takes a little bit of time to get there. So, essentially what you're looking with the 2021 data is probably what we've kind of planted, contributed through, 2010, 2015, something in that range.
So I think Tim will get to you in a second, but just if I'm understanding correct. So if you have that like 5-ish year lag, and our goal is to get to 55% by 2035, really we're looking at what we're planting 25 to 30, like 2025 to 2030 will actually be what we're looking to get to that number.
I mean, that will be the last push. Yes, yes. Probably much planted after 2030 won't contribute to meeting that time frame, obviously after that, but yeah. And then, like I said, it varies. Street trees you plant usually a 6-7 foot tall tree, so we'll get to a little bit quicker, but a lot of the natural area stuff we're planting is what we call bare roots or 1 or 2 gallon pots. So they're generally, maybe 2 feet when they go in the ground. So Chris, anything you have to add to kind of your observations on the data for Issaquah, or just in general, how you kind of track canopy changes and trends?
In general, we didn't get that fine level of detail on the analysis, but the plan will likely lay out the methods for monitoring and factors to consider when looking at causes for gains and losses in canopy. And then for the scenarios or forecasting future canopy cover, we'll be documenting our methodology. There's only a few ways that we see cities going about it, so it's going to stick to an industry standard. And that way you'll have ways to evaluate and reassess to see where you're at and if you're straying from target.
Like I said, I think that's definitely something we're looking at in terms of guess that would be more of a strategy would be, essentially these 4 to maybe 5 year intervals of reassessments of our urban tree canopy. So we have this one in 2024 or 2023 with the 2021 data, looking at doing that probably again in 2028, so probably 1 or 2 more times before getting to that 2035 time frame. So
Tim?
Hi, yeah, I've got a couple questions. So I'll start off with what you're already touching on, which is what I didn't understand is I saw there was a goal for the percentage coverage. Where did that goal come from? And in that goal, in that goal, what are the types of trees that you are incorporating there? Like what percentage are deciduous? What percentage are, red cedar? How are you looking at what the goal is and what the makeup of it, and the best case scenario for the makeup of that hitting that mark is?
Well, Tim, maybe I can start, and Chris, if you have anything to add. The 55% goal, my best understanding, first of all, that is in Issaquah's climate action plan, so our ICAP plan that was published and adopted 2.5 years ago. I think we just hit our midpoint for the 5-year kind of implementation of that. So that's where that goal lies. My understanding, this was, kind of chosen before I started working here, but what I've heard from Stacy with sustainability, kind of chatting, and maybe Chris, you might even have more context on this, having, worked for Planet Geo for a while, was kind of looking at that, essentially we did that 2019 report. All we had was 2011 and 2017 bar graphs there. So 2017 was the most current high resolution data to get the urban tree canopy. Not 100% sure why 2011 was chosen as the baseline. I think it was a balance of you don't want to go too far back because then you kind of lose track of trends and stuff, but also you don't want to be a year or two past because you're not going to see much change. So I think it was kind of looking at that 3% gain in that time frame and thinking, what might be realistic. Based on another, I guess, 15 plus years after that. And that does tie into what were on some of the slides, the PPA or the possible planting area, kind of looking at what we think we could realistically achieve. I would say it's ambitious, you can see here holding serve is pretty good for a lot of cities in our region right now. Seattle's had a 30% goal and, they've been in the mid-low 20s and just went back 1% or 2% in their most recent update. And I'm not trying to make excuses or compare to other things, but it is like I said, a pretty ambitious goal. And I think that's where, some of this work, obviously across private property, public property, and cross-agency collaboration. And also one of the biggest opportunities is probably Lake Samandra State Park. Some of the areas there, working with some of the larger HOAs like Issaquah Highlands and Talus that have some of these kind of undeveloped, kind of wetland areas, as receiving sites for trees. So these are meetings that Chris and I have had with those 2 big HOAs to kind of discuss the plan and try to get creative ways that we can support each other in some of that work. So it's definitely going to take a lot more than just the city running programs on public land, because we are getting to the point where we just don't have a lot of uncanopied areas. And that's not to say that the areas that have tree canopy don't still need work and thinking about succession and health of these trees. So Tim, that's the first part. Hopefully, sorry, a lot, but the second part in terms of composition of forest, we don't have that right now. So the best thing I would say that we do have was our Green Issaquah 20-year implementation plan that was published back in 2019 or 2020. And that really looked at our 1,500 or so acres of public open spaces and really did some kind of high level compositions for both dominant tree species and for understory. So there's some really good information in that plan based on different management units across the city. So that really is the best thing that kind of encompasses our natural areas, but it doesn't have the level of, something that says 60% conifer, 40%, but it can give you some pretty good ideas of specific park and open spaces in terms of their species composition. And then, as Chris kind of touched on briefly, one of the big, I kind of teased at this, having forestry staff, having a forest management plan, and having a tree inventory is kind of the third main core foundational piece of a urban forest program. So that is something that will really hopefully be jumping into next year, looking to get some funding from DNR that supports Department of Natural Resources, that supports a lot of urban forestry work. And Tim, to that point, that'll give us a much better, it won't be literally every tree in our open spaces because that scale and scope is pretty huge. We're talking about a few 100,000 trees probably in the city of Issaquah. But often, for instance, city of Sammamish has a public tree inventory of about 20,000 trees right now. So I'm guessing it'd be in that ballpark, maybe a little bit higher. And then that would be really neat to see the composition. That usually comes with some basic kind of health assessments for those trees too. So actually seeing kind of where those trees are at in their life cycles. So that's something I really hope then will be one of the first kind of big actions that we want to take from this plan and move forward with, and have that, both publicly available and then, internal for our decisions around, there's a lot of stuff out there of trying not to have more than 10% of a single genus. So, closely related plants that might be susceptible to pest diseases, climate change, we're talking about that with emerald ash borer moving to the region. And then some species that might be a little more susceptible to climate changes too. So that's kind of that first principle around a resilient tree canopy, not just 55%, but something that's actually going to sustain itself, past 2035 as well. So sorry, Tim, that was a lot, but hopefully that got at what you were asking.
Well, yes and no. The goal number apparently came out of a 2019 report, but what does it mean? Is that a goal that is considered sort of a gold standard for cities around the Northwest, the West Coast, the United States? Do some cities go more? Do some cities go lower?
Okay.
Is there what's the magic with that number? And, I think that's a reasonable question considering that's what you're putting in as your goal for all this work.
Yeah, and this is where I'm a little hesitant. I don't want to ever get too hung up on that being like the end all be all sort of success metric. I mean, for the Issaquah Climate Action Plan, that goal was trying to look at essentially one tool for addressing climate change. So essentially looking at carbon sequestration, increasing our tree canopy there. 55% is not an industry standard by any means. It varies quite a bit by the size of the city, obviously the region and the country. It is one of the higher ones in Western Washington for sure, of cities that have urban tree canopy assessments. I've seen some stuff through Arbor Day Foundation that has recommended kind of generally around a 40% tree canopy, as being a target for most cities. So we're obviously well above that, but that 55%, I think, is looking at a commitment to continue to grow, and through Issaquah Climate Action Plan, really through the perspective of carbon sequestration and the value trees play, in mitigating those impacts of climate change. So, yeah, it was a little bit kind of chosen more as what's realistic to think that we can grow towards versus any sort of, hey, this is what's, comparable. I would say Issaquah's unique. It's high, but we also have, as Connie mentioned, we're right on the urban growth management kind of interface. So we have a lot of these large contiguous forest areas on the perimeter of our city that really bump up our tree canopy quite a bit. But then if you look at, central Issaquah, I think we're somewhere in the 20%. So that's kind of where we're talking about this equitable distribution, prioritizing trees in areas that are, kind of under canopied at this point, while knowing, the perimeters of our cities really kind of drive a lot of our tree canopy at this point, riparian areas too.
If I could just add, the plan's going to include a feasibility study. So a lot of this happens to us pretty often where a climate action plan sets the canopy goal and then we back into it. But what we do is we show hypothetically what it would require with a public, the city leading a certain percentage, the public leading, private development having a role as well, and seeing, what on an annual basis are the number of trees and the costs and what's required for preservation of what you already have. So there's going to be supporting considerations with that 55% goal. We also do various scenarios for consideration, but we're not going into this plan saying the ICAP needs to be updated, but we will provide these considerations for if and when that plan gets updated, that it can use the urban forestry plan for those updates. So that's generally the process that we see these taking. And then if you recall, I did mention the a resilient planting strategy as a goal in the plan, and that we're doing what's called the Climate Tree Atlas and the Sister City Climate Analysis to look at things about species that work well now and in the future or don't work well. And just one last comment, when we met with the Snoqualmie tribe, there is a real emphasis on conifers because of the history behind the native conifers. So that'll be part of this planting palette consideration as well. So these are common questions that you raised there, Tim. Yeah, as we go through the process of drafting the supporting actions, there will be opportunity to review that context then.
Okay, well, let me go to the dark side, if you would, which is the fact that more trees, more fuels, wildfire hits the west side, then what we've created is a problem. And how is that being factored into all this planning? Because it's the increase in wildfires is really only going in one direction. It really hasn't hit this side of the Cascades as hard. But one of the ways you cut down on wildfires are making fire breaks and thinning things out. So I wish this wasn't something to bring up. I love having a healthy, dense forest, but I think it's not an unreasonable point to at least have on the table when you're talking about increasing planting and increasing the fuel available for a wildfire event.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's on the table, and Dan can follow up here with my response. But, it's similar to how trees were planted and then they raised sidewalks. There's better science to know which trees to plant or amendments to make so that doesn't happen. There's also better ways of planting spacing wise, the different zones that are laid out, and then the types of species as well. And then debris management was brought up with our staff interviews and our meetings with the HOAs like Issaquah Highlands. So there is this balance, because also if we're talking about increasing canopy cover, what about the folks that had to pay for a large tree to be removed and now they're asking to plant more trees? There's this balance, and it's about applying industry standards and best practices, and really more so a coordinated effort. One thing that to call to attention is Dan and others have organized this cross-department, I believe, team meeting, really to sync up about things relating to trees and the defensible space and the WUI criteria, wildland urban interface, is one of the topics, and it's on our radar that there may be some state changes coming. I think ultimately having that canopy assessment, having an inventory, and having solid permitting and development procedures can really help with being smart about increasing canopy. Where, with what types of species, when, who's responsible, and what to do when there's a storm, debris management, not just dumping it at the end of a wooded lot and then having that build up and be a concern. So these are things we were hearing during our meetings, and the plan is looking to address those concerns. But I do hear you. It's something that we heard expressed in the surveys as well, is the wildfire concern.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, it looks like I was gonna add one or two things. Did you have any follow-ups for Chris?
No, that's good. I just kind of wanted to put that out there. And if you don't mind, as someone that used to do a ton of PowerPoint presentations, some of your pie charts add up to 100%. Some of them don't. And the ones that don't make my head hurt when I look at them.
There's one that adds up to 99. I know.
Well, some
a
of them added up to
number.
about 300. So
Yep.
yeah, so it just I think it can be confusing for your audience. So I just thought I'd give you that feedback, and I'll thank you and go on mute.
Yeah, if you see the error too, spot that so we can have this as a reference going forward. But on our spreadsheets and stuff, the data is critical to being able to monitor. So if there is an error, let me know on that. Oh, one other thing, we did a comparison of canopy cover for 20 cities as part of the benchmarking. So that'll be part of this roll up too, which was one of the comments or questions that were raised. How does it compare? We also look at canopy goals of other cities just as a reference point, and then what's recommended by the industry. So kind of bringing that back to the canopy discussion. I didn't mention that earlier. I wanted to touch on that. So thanks for your comments and questions, Tim.
Thanks. David, you've been so patiently waiting. I think we'll take a question.
No, it's all good. Tim had some great points there. So if we want to just go one slide back from the one you're presenting right now. Just more of a general comment. So yeah, it was that one right there. Yeah, that does add up to 100. So this is not the slide, but I know what Tim's talking about. So I'm looking at sort of that orange area, the total possible planting area, the 16%. And I'm looking at the goal that was set at 55%. And honestly, that 4% is coming from the orange part, if I'm correct about that, and it cannot come from the 33%. So that being said, in simple math terms, you're looking at 4%, 16%. You're looking at the total possible planting area. You're looking at planting 25% of that area with trees. So again, I'm just being very generalistic about this. Like in that actual picture that you have on this slide, that's an open field. Are we considering someplace like an open field or even something like a Confluence Park? You are literally asking to plant 25% of that open space with trees. And also on the HOA side, I know you've been talking to them. Yeah, I mean, I'm part of an HOA too. I would love to plant a couple trees, but if you're talking about taking away 25% of my open space, that's a lot. Right. And so I guess my question or comment is this 55%, to Tim's point, really achievable? Like, how did we actually pick this thing if you're literally looking at 25% of the possible planting area?
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you look at it through that lens, because that's how we first look at, this goal. Well, where's it coming from? Where are the trees going to go? And yeah, that's a good way to look at it, is 25% of that PPA. So part of the feasibility study is to look at like what is the city committing to with the ICAP, the Issaquah Climate Action Plan. And you also oftentimes find that this arbitrary number that was set is a daunting number when you look at number of trees and where the trees would go. So that's, I understand that part of it. And then also, there are other strategies. You do need to increase canopy, but one of the things that the city looked at, it wasn't totally arbitrary from my understanding, when setting the 55, it was looking at, well, let's not go below 50%. And then there were just some additional minor inputs that said, well, 55% seems feasible. Let's not lose canopy and then do a minor increase. But what the management plan is looking at is now, okay, what does that really mean? How many small statured trees, medium statured, large statured? What percent mortality when planting, post-planting, city-led versus private property owner planting? So there are these variables that we put in, these assumptions, to at least see like, okay, 55% is going to require this. X number of trees by the city alone. So that we'll have that data to present, and then it really does come down to the city to make a decision, like, does something change in the climate action plan, or do we leave things as they stand in the urban forest plan, but provide guidance on how to reassess in 5 years or something? So, yeah, because I will say, like, a 55% canopy goal, having done over 30 of these management plan projects, it is a high target. And Issaquah does have significant canopy cover. It's the 4th highest in the 20 assessments that we looked at. So just give you some context there.
Okay. And then one other comment I just had is, obviously, I think we've discussed it in the meetings prior, is the western red cedar dieback that's happening, and it's accelerating at this point. I mean, you drive anywhere in Issaquah, you'll see it. So is that, if it's died back, is it still considered canopy, or is it actually a negative on the canopy?
Yeah, that's getting a little finer in the assumptions, but we do add a mortality rate for existing trees. And it's kind of broad brush, but at least using, I have to look at the numbers, but there's a set that the Forest Service established for setting these canopy goals and tracking. It's below 1%, but when you look citywide, that ends up being pretty significant. But yeah, those assumptions will lay out, and it'll be something that folks can read as an appendix or as a supporting document, but we want to make sure you have that on hand if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions, thanks.
Guys have any questions regarding the presentation?
Can we go back to the vision statement, Chris?
Sure. Yep.
And just get sort of everyone's eyes on that again to make sure that that still feels like the right level of vision statement for this urban forest management plan, knowing that we've just done some other visioning for the park system plan as well. And, you know, we want these to speak to each other, and they are, but just sort of an assessment here to make sure that this still feels like the right level.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, from my feedback is it looks like it's the correct framework to move forward. Based off the survey results that were showed, and the highest things that people want to prioritize, and they like the, you know, the wildlife habitat and future for all. So
I'd say internally, we felt pretty good about this. We've talked a little bit about that last one, ensure a sustainable future, you know, whether that's, there's a lot of other factors that go into that other than urban or forestry.
Not just trees,
Like that's the only thing that's going to ensure a sustainable future. So we've talked about that last one there, maybe softening a little bit, but overall, kind of right as you mentioned, I think capturing what we generally heard from the community and city staff. Looks like Tim has a.
Tim?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I raised my hand, then you just touched on the point, which is the way you end it. It's a little flowery and kind of rainbow, you know, and lollipops type thing, because a sustainable canopy won't, a canopy like this won't create a sustainable future for all by itself. So, you know, maybe contribute to a sustainable future for all. But yeah, that was my point, because it sounds nice, but the reality is that, as we all know, it's going to take more.
That's right. Yeah, good feedback.
What else on the vision statement? Maybe we could, if folks have any comments or thoughts on this, maybe we could then quickly kind of review some of the principles and make sure those kind of statements associated with each of those, or that you feel good about those kind of 5 buckets, I guess, that will really kind of guide how the plan is organized. So Chris, that's the next slide, I believe.
Yes, thank you. So on the left are the themes and then the statement for the guiding principle. And just as a refresher, the themes kind of recognize what we've heard as in terms of priorities, and the themes also align with the themes in the urban forest audits that can serve as a monitoring mechanism for measuring the plan implementation. So I'll leave it at that and see if there's, I know it's a lot of reading here. I guess one other thing I want to mention is that this isn't the only time. These are working drafts that will take shape over the next few months as we're drafting, but we want to make sure we're on target with these and not missing something big.
Yeah, Andrew?
Hello. I have a question around, I know that in the vision statement, we called out the habitat and wildlife. Is there a guiding principle that kind of covers I believe that was like 86% of the respondents. Can you speak more about how any of the guiding principles are touching on that, or maybe it's a little bit more focused on tree preservation or tree protection?
I believe the latter there more so is that through preservation, protection, and expansion, it would contribute to all benefits and services, not specifically called out habitat or wildlife, but it's a consideration. As you mentioned, it does show highly with the feedback we heard from the public.
And Andrew, Chris and I haven't talked about this much, but I think we have talked about the riparian study and, how that was originally kind of the motivation for that was around, the kind of the history of salmon recovery work the city's done in our riparian buffers. So that's definitely connected and kind of the motivation there. I would say Chris and I have talked about community education, stewardship, our Green Issaquah program. We've really been kind of branching that out from, specifically just kind of hands-on stewardship events, pulling weeds, planting trees, and that sort of stuff, to more community education around. We just actually was building back in early April, had our Coexisting with Carnivores event with a bunch of folks from DFW, Snoqualmie Tribe, and really looking how we can incorporate some of that kind of tangentially with the urban forestry work too, just kind of education, how to, kind of, we're all living in this habitat together and how we can kind of best coexist there. So there's some of these existing programs. I think there's some areas as we talk about, obviously we're focusing on trees and canopy a lot tonight, talking about this, but, some of the certifications around, there's Bee City USA, some of these kind of pollinator habitat things. I think the plan's not gonna, I don't want to overpromise, focus in depth on these, but when we're kind of getting into some of those, certifications that the city can strive for, I think there's some things with Chris we can maybe chat about a little bit more that we could kind of call out or point out in the plan there. So I think some of it ties to education. I think some of it ties into, guess it could kind of fall under, the preservation and protection, with maybe a little bit more focus on whether that's pollinators or, large carnivores and stuff like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep, good points there.
Chris, I'm also, these guiding principles then also have strategies that go along with them. So maybe there is space to add something related to sort of wildlife and habitat specifically in one of the strategies for some of these guiding principles that might kind of help reinforce that, seeing as it was such a high community output sort of interest item.
For sure. Thanks for that suggestion. We will be going back through with the feedback. Dan shared the staff feedback on this draft, and then we'll incorporate your feedback. So Dan and I will meet to debrief on that. And I think that's one thing we'll look at for sure is how to incorporate it into the strategies a bit more. I do know that we talk about understory and supporting vegetation with some of the actions. I just don't recall where, but with that thought in mind, is that's the entire ecosystem, not just trees.
Right. Mary?
I'm brand new to this. This is only my second meeting, and as far as the staffing, I don't know how this works city-wise, but I know that budgets and things like that go up and down. And I think that so much of this is reliant on having the money to staff maintenance, to staff knowledge about different trees, but just different knowledge about the what the environment can and should have in it. How much guarantee do we have for the future as far as much as we have any guarantee of any future, but like in this way, because it seems to be the well cared for part of the mission statement and all of these goals is a big deal. It seems like a very important thing.
I mean, yeah. How committed the community is in telling city council for this. The fact that we have an urban forest management supervisor is a big commitment. That was a brand new position that actually came out of the Green Issaquah plan and the previous 2018 park system plan that was done. So like these plans do have actionable steps that then lead to positions. Our volunteer coordinator position is part of that as well. So there definitely is a commitment there for that. I think to some of the strategies specifically that are being called out in this plan, some of that is going to be looking at different funding sources outside of just what the city can support. There will be, city support for some of these things, but to reach those goals, we're going to need to look for, other grants and other funding sources, partnerships with other agencies to be able to do that as well. We do have a really large maintenance staff currently. We've been increasing that over the years. There is a lot of knowledge within that team. I mean, Dan knows it. He's with them every day. And we do different trainings on things. They actually, I feel like they've done like 2 or 3 different tree specific trainings this past year. So there is, things that are already being done within those teams. So I don't know if that sort of helps, but
yeah. And I think too that the awareness, part of that is the awareness for the community,
right,
and keeping that at forefront as well, because to drive the need for things.
And we've heard a lot about that from the survey, from talking to the HOAs. It's this really heavy emphasis on guiding principle, be there, and these designers. And, so I think we've done a good job really building out Green Issaquah and how you can hands-on get involved. I think there's a lot more interest in online resources. We have a lot of work to do. This ties into what Chris is talking a little bit about. I want to make sure I'm getting it right. I think it was the climate tree atlas, our tree list, information there and some updates there that are really needed at this point. And then, as Santi said, I think, really kind of emphasizing that some of it's going to come from within, some of it's current staff with more professional development. We just in the last year, myself and one of my colleagues got our ISA certifications, doing some tree pruning in-house courses. Really are going to have to look into some of these funding sources, often through the state and county, that really do support urban forestry too, which the city hasn't really pursued much for. So those are some certainly priorities.
I come from public education, and I definitely think that having schools are always looking for input and for knowledge at an elementary school level and middle school level would be amazing to get kids talking about this and also going home and talking about it.
Yes.
With their families. It's a great awareness avenue.
That's an area for growth for our program. There's a lot of adult education. We have 2 high school interns. We kind of work at the high school age a lot, but I think below that's an area that we certainly have some.
Yeah, I think that my generation was the Just Say No campaign, and I would go home and scream at my dad because he was a smoker. Right. They go home and talk a lot until they turn into teenagers and they don't talk anymore.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, good point there. I just wanted to add to that. One thing that we like to remind is that this is a first ever urban forest management plan. So this is really setting things in motion, possibly changes the policy, programs, funding sources, and staffing. And so we look to recommend what can be done with current capacity and then incrementally build over time. And one thing that we look to address under current capacity is, existing workflows, what's established as a protocol, where are there inefficiencies with different overlaps with different tree-related activities and programs. So definitely hear your comment and question there. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Great. Dan or Chris, is there anything else specific that you are?
I don't think so, other than to say that I'm available. Questions I can certainly, run by Chris as well as they come up. So if you have thoughts on this after tonight, the next few weeks, we will be seeing you, I'm guessing at some point in the next 2 or 3 months. We'll
We
talk
can
about that.
talk about sort
Sorry.
of what that next meeting, that next touch point is. I'm imagining probably once you all have draft document ready for sort of review and then possibly action that the board could take to sort of recommend it before it moves on through the city council process. Yeah.
So Chris, anything last feedback or anything you're looking for? You want to?
I think we're in good shape here. Got a lot of good feedback on the drafts, and there will be more opportunities for review. So I just wanted to reiterate that Dan and I will be meeting to debrief on what we're hearing from staff and from the boards on this draft framework, and that we're here for more comments and questions, because I know we presented a lot and there's a lot behind the scenes on methodology, data sets, things like that. So feel free to reach out if you have questions or something wasn't clear. And I just want to thank you again for your time and attention here this evening.
Thank you, Chris, for
Joining. Yeah.
joining us. Yep.
Thanks, Chris. And just another note, we do have a ad hoc committee group from the park board, specifically on urban forestry. There's 4 members on that group, and I believe there is 1 community member involved in it. So there's actually room for another park board member. So if anyone was interested in joining that, you'll probably get some emails asking to review the document in a little bit more depth, and possibly like 1 or 2 more meetings before this plan actually moves forward for final adoption. That group also is going to be looking at our heritage tree program, which we've brought to the board a couple times and we'll be coming back at another time. But just want to throw that little plug out there too for those that might be interested. Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dan. Chris, I think you can probably stop sharing, and then Ryan, we can move on with the rest of our meeting.
Okay.
Just not that much
Thanks
more.
again, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye.
Thank you again so much. See you soon. Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Well, the next item on our list is the reports. Our youth members are taking a break because there's no school, obviously. So they're not on the agenda, but they'll be back in September. Do you know, we have 2 new?
We will likely have the same 2.
Okay.
I believe they are both going to be continuing on the youth advisory board, and they both still have interest in being the park board, but we'll always go back and sort of check in with them at the beginning of the year to make sure there's still interest and see if there's any other members that may want to join them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Next will be the director's report.
Yes, so director's report. Jeff obviously hasn't been here for this meeting because he was at the city council meeting this evening with Robin, taking our Hillside Park project to council for bid award, which is very exciting. I got the news just as the meeting was starting that bid was awarded tonight by city council. So yay, a very exciting, very long project. Hillside Park is going to be, going forward into construction. We have a great contractor that bid on that award, and more to come on what that construction timeline looks like, but it'll be starting here, in the next few weeks. We've got to do some contracting work with them and look at timelines, but that project will be starting soon, which is very exciting, both for the neighborhood, for park board. Tim, you got a question?
Yeah, did I hear you say construction's going to start in the next few weeks?
Construction will be starting at that site soon. We just got our contractor on board, so we'll need to figure out sort of what that timeline looks like, but we do want to sort of be able to start that construction over the summer because that's the construction window when we hit fall and rain and all that fun. But yes, that will be starting soon.
And when is it expected to be complete?
I don't have that information, but I will check in with Robin and Julie, who are sort of in charge of that project, and we will get some more information about what that construction and timeline looks like.
Thank you.
So yeah, that just went out. There will be updates on the website, and I think we have an email group for that park that we will start sending sort of updates for what that construction timeline looks like. And then just an update that tomorrow evening, there will be another city council committee meeting. The Services, Safety and Parks Committee meets, and Robin and Jeff will be taking the park system plan update to that committee, really going over a lot of the information that we've already been touching on here at Park Board, and giving that committee time to sort of ask questions, give feedback before we get to sort of the 90% draft of that document, to then go out for public review. So this is like one of our city council checks, and then the draft plan, we've been working with our consultants, we're really close on it. So hopefully with that feedback, y'all's feedback from the last meeting, we will have a draft plan out for comment in the beginning of July for about 2 weeks. And then when we come back for our July meeting, we will sort of be looking at all of that feedback, and hopefully be wrapping that project up as well. And then to come this July, we've talked about this a little bit, but we are going to be doing some more sort of education and outreach on the potential pool, Julius Bone Pool project, talking about that feasibility study in a little bit more depth. There is going to be an opportunity for some community feedback, to just sort of hear from more of our community members about that feasibility study, the possible expansion. And we will be doing some outreach at one of our concerts on the green coming up this summer, as well as some partnerships with the pool as well. And then I wanted to thank you all for helping push out our recreation survey that closed a couple of days ago. And we got really amazing feedback. I think we got like over 600 responses to that survey, which is huge for community surveys. So thank you for pushing that out and for getting us your feedback. Our recreation team is going to be reviewing all of that information and sort of seeing what the trends are that came out of that, if there are programmatic changes that we might be making. As we're heading into the city's budget season, this is really helpful information and data for us to be able to show, you know, this is really a community value and where we can add some more capacity. And then last thing that I have is just a call for some possible volunteers. The city is hosting the Down Home 4th of July parade and Field of Fun this year. And we are looking for volunteers that might want to help out for the Kids and Pets Parade that goes down Front Street, and our Field of Fun, which will have lots of activities. There's bouncy houses, there's a petting zoo planned, and a whole lot of other activities. The festivities are from 11 to 2 that day, so we're looking for volunteers between like 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. There's a couple of different shifts, and I think I sent everybody an email with those details, so if you don't mind sending those out to your networks, or if any of you are available and want to help out, we'd be happy to have you. And that's what I've got from Jeff for director's report.
Awesome, thank you. As acting chairperson, I've decided to honor the group with a acting chairperson report. But I just want to do a big shout out to the Parks and Rec team in the city of Issaquah and all the youth that started summer camp today. And the summer camp programs is a big undertaking. It is a very fun program. As someone who had kids that have been in those programs, they're very vibrant and fun and great experiences for the children. So if you have the opportunity to have someone that's maybe even working them, as some of my neighbors are, a big shout out to them. Just a reminder, the Issaquah Farmers Market is in full swing on Saturdays. Concerts on the green start next Tuesday. So those are very fun if you have the opportunity to get out and go do that. And we're about 10 days away from 4th of July. So just happy 4th of July, everybody. It's one of my favorite holidays of the year. So it's one of the best times of the year to get out, enjoy our parks and our trails, and enjoy your beautiful city. So those are my chairperson's report. Does anybody have any other business or announcements? Awesome. Thank you for letting me sit in tonight. It's been a pleasure. And just a reminder, our next meeting is July 22nd. It was not moved, so it'll still be this July 22nd. And maybe the shortest meeting I've ever been a part of. At 8:17, we'll call the meeting adjourned.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.